How successful was the League of Nations in their peacekeeping efforts in the 1920s? To answer that, we need to look at what the League actually did when disputes broke out between countries. In this video, we won't be looking at the League's successes in terms of agencies and commissions. That's for a different video. For peacekeeping efforts in this video, we'll look at 4 key examples in chronological order. First, Vilna in the 1920s, the Aaland Islands in 1921, Corfu in 1923, and Bulgaria in 1925. This video, you'll be able to judge whether the League was successful at peacekeeping during the 1920s. Our first example is Vilna in 1920. After the First World War, the peace settlement created a new state called Lithuania. Vilna was made the capital of Lithuania. However, there was a problem. Vilna had a largely Polish population. This meant that although it officially belonged to Lithuania, many of the people living there were Polish. In 1920, a Polish army seized Vilna. Lithuania appealed to the League of Nations for help. This is exactly the sort of situation the League had been created to deal with. One country had used force, and another country wanted the international community to step in. The League asked Polish troops to withdraw, while a plebiscite, which just means vote, was arranged. However, Poland refused to withdraw. This was a serious problem for the League. It made a request, but Poland ignored it. The League did not force Poland to leave Vilna. Instead, the matter was passed on to the Conference of Ambassadors. The Conference of Ambassadors was established in 1920 and wasn't officially an arm of the League of Nations. It was a group of senior diplomats representing the Allied powers who oversaw matters arising from the peace settlement. As such, it duplicated some of the functions of the League. It played a major role in the resolution of the Vilna Dispute and the Corfu Incident. After 1925, it became increasingly inactive until it was dissolved. The Conference of Ambassadors awarded Vilna to Poland. Overall, the situation in Vilna represented a failure for the League of Nations. The League had been asked to deal with a dispute, but it was unable to make Poland obey its decision. The final decision was not really made by the League at all, but by the Conference of Ambassadors. This showed one of the League's biggest weaknesses. It could make recommendations, but it struggled to enforce them when a country refused to cooperate. The second example is the Aaland Islands. This was one of the League's clearest successes. The Aaland Islands were located in the Baltic Sea between Sweden and Finland. Both Sweden and Finland claimed the islands. Most of the islanders wanted to be ruled by Sweden. However, Finland also had a claim to the islands. This could have been a serious dispute, but instead of using force, the issue was referred to the League of Nations. The League investigated the matter. It decided that the Aaland Islands should belong to Finland, but it also introduced safeguards to protect the islanders. One of the most important safeguards was demilitarization. Demilitarization meant that the islands would not be used for military purposes. This helped reduce tension because Sweden did not have the fear that Finland would turn the islands into a military base. Most importantly, Sweden accepted the League's judgment. This made the Aaland Islands a clear success for the League. The League had investigated the problem, reached a decision, protected the interests of the people living there, and prevented the dispute from turning into violence. This showed that the League could work when countries involved were willing to accept its judgment. The third example is the Corfu Incident of 1923. This was probably the most important League dispute of the 1920s because it exposed the League's weaknesses when dealing with a more powerful country. In August 1923, Mussolini, the Italian Prime Minister, ordered the naval bombardment and occupation of the Greek island of Corfu. This happened after an Italian general and some of his staff were murdered while patrolling the border between Greece and Albania. The murders had taken place on Greek soil, and Mussolini immediately demanded compensation. He wanted Greece to pay 50 million lira, and he also demanded the execution of the assassins. However, Greece was unable to find the people responsible. Mussolini then decided to take direct action. Italian forces bombarded and occupied Corfu. Greece appealed to the League of Nations. At first, the League condemned the invasion. This suggests that the League recognised Italy as the aggressor. However, Mussolini insisted the final decision should not be made by the League. Instead, he wanted the issue passed over to the Conference of Ambassadors. The Conference of Ambassadors ordered Greece to pay compensation, and Italy then withdrew its troops from Corfu. On the surface, this may look like the crisis was solved. Italy left Corfu and the fighting did not become a wider war. However, the deeper issue was much more damaging for the League. The impression created was that Mussolini's bullying tactics had worked. Italy had used force, Greece had been made to pay compensation, and the League had not really been able to punish Italy. This made the League look weak. It also suggested that powerful countries could get away with aggression, especially if they could move the decision away from the League and towards the Conference of Ambassadors. The Corfu Incident, therefore, exposed a major weakness in the League. It was much less effective when dealing with a major power such as Italy. Overall, the Corfu Incident was a failure. Although Italy eventually withdrew, Mussolini had used force and still achieved his aim. Greece had to pay compensation and the League appeared ineffective. Corfu showed that the League's authority could be undermined when powerful countries refused to accept its decisions. The fourth example is Bulgaria in 1925. This dispute took place in southeastern Europe. A Greek sentry was killed during an exchange of fire on the border between Greece and Bulgaria. In response, Greece invaded Bulgarian territory. The League judged that Greece's response was disproportionate. A border shooting had taken place, but invading Bulgaria was seen as an excessive response. The League ordered Greece to pay £45,000 compensation to Bulgaria. Greece accepted the ruling. This was a success for the League because it had stepped in, judged the situation, ordered compensation, and prevented the conflict from getting worse. However, there was a problem. Greece felt the decision was unfair because Italy had been treated very differently during the Corfu incident. This made the League look inconsistent. It suggested that smaller countries could be made to obey the League, but larger or more powerful countries could avoid serious punishment. So, Bulgaria was a success, but it also revealed an important weakness. The League could act effectively against smaller states, but it struggled to apply the same standards to more powerful countries. So, why was the League successful in the Aaland Islands and Bulgaria, but unsuccessful in Vilna and Corfu? When we compare these four examples, we can see a clear pattern. The League was more successful in the cases of the Aaland Islands and Bulgaria because the countries involved were willing to accept the League's judgments. The League did not need to use force. Its authority was respected. However, Vilna and Corfu were very different. The League could ask a country to act, but it had very limited power to make that country obey. So, the League could be successful when smaller countries accepted its decisions, but it struggled when stronger countries ignored it or when powerful states moved decisions away from the League.